This episode is presented by the Visit Cedar City Brian Head Tourism Bureau. Discover the art of adventure at Utah's gateway to the parks. Cedar City is within a few hours' drive from 6 different national parks and monuments, and only 30 minutes from fresh snow at Brian Head Resort. Check out visitcedarcity.com to plan your next trip. This episode is sponsored by the Cedar City Business and Innovation Center, dedicated to supporting local businesses and entrepreneurs. It provides resources and services aimed at fostering business creation, growth, and retention. The center features the Makerspace, where entrepreneurs and small businesses can have access to 3D printers, video production, and photography equipment, t-shirt printing, and more. Whether you're starting a new venture or looking to expand an existing one, the Cedar City Business and Innovation Center offers the tools and guidance to help you succeed. To learn more and get involved, visit innovationcenter.cc. Hello and welcome to another episode of Explore Local Podcast, presented by Visit Cedar City Brian Head in partnership with Cedar City Iron County Economic Development. This is produced by Dallas Smith Media, and I'm your host, David Johnson, Economic Development Director for Cedar City and Iron County. All right, and welcome to the Explore Local Podcast. Today we have Danny Stewart, who is the Associate Vice President over Project Development for the Utah Inland Port.
Right.
Close enough?
Close enough.
Yeah.
It's a horrendously long title, but it's Regional Project Area Development. My region is Southern Utah, basically Juab, Beaver, and Iron counties right now.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, Danny, because you were the predecessor before me doing economic development for Cedar City and Iron County. And I consider you a friend and a mentor. Whenever I have questions about context or history on things, I give you a buzz and say, Danny, help me better understand this here on what we've done in the past regarding whatever economic development project we may be working on. And you and I tag team a lot with the Utah Inland Port.
It's great. You know, I consider my position now, I'm still doing economic development for Cedar City and Iron County. It's just an extension of what I was doing before. And it's such a pleasure working with you and having a team.
Yeah.
You're doing a phenomenal job, and I think we work very well together. I think we're seeing some good success, and I'm excited for new stuff that we'll see in the future.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Well, why don't you start us off? I think when people hear the Utah Inland Port, I think there's some misnomers. It's gone, when it first was starting, and right now I'm referring to the Utah Inland Port that kind of started up in Salt Lake, Wasatch Front. There were some different iterations. But what we see now today, explain to kind of the function of the Utah Inland Port and its purpose.
Yeah, I could fill the hour with just this. I'll try to keep it the short version. But I was surprised to find out when I got online and started looking at the concept of an inland port in the state of Utah that the discussion actually goes back to the 1970s. Just knowing Utah's position as crossroads of the West, and that makes sense with the transportation crossroads that we have with Interstate 15, Interstate 70, and I-80. Also, the railroad that runs north to south and throughout the state, and Salt Lake International Airport. This crossroads concept has been important, and the ability to more efficiently move stuff and move people throughout the state has been discussed for a long, long time. It was 2018 that the legislature formally created the Utah Inland Port Authority. And I'd been hearing this discussion when I was working as economic development director, probably going back to 2015, 2016, or maybe even earlier, just this concept of an inland port. And as you know, in promoting Cedar City, Iron County, really some of the best things that we have going for us here in the county is our geographic location and our connectivity to major Western markets. And the fact that we have the interstate here and the rail spur that's been here for 100 years.
Right.
As soon as I hear talk of an inland port, my ears perk up, and I thought this is something that Iron County needs to be a part of as well. So, while I was in your position, I just started tagging along and trying to learn as much as I could about this concept. I met the original director of the Inland Port Authority, Jack Hedge, who came out of the Port of Long Beach, had many discussions with him, joined up with elected officials here, with the Chamber of Commerce, Chris McCormick, and we spent a lot of time just having discussions with this group about how Iron County could be a part of this. And we weren't alone. There were other rural counties with connection to rail and these sorts of things, looking at how can we be part of this inland port thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So today, there's still a major misunderstanding. What is an inland port? And people will still ask me today, have you built that port yet?
Yes.
So hopefully what we talk about today will kind of clear that up.
Yeah.
We're not building a port. We are facilitating private investment in Iron County and in 12 other project areas throughout the state. So that's really what we're doing.
Well, I like how you use the term project area. So inland port, we do think of like a physical port. So, along our coastal states, they have ports, right? Where imports and exports are coming in and out, right? And we think of kind of a physical location. But the Utah inland port, the concept of imports and exports coming in here, and you mentioned the crossroads, that concept's still there. But the project area, and as I've described it, and you can correct this description. I know you've heard me say it before, but it kind of functions almost like a redevelopment agency, in the sense that it's a designated area in which if a business builds, there's opportunity for further incentives and support to encourage them to come and expand within Utah's borders, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when we talk about the Utah Inland Port, and you mentioned Wasatch Front, so the original designated Utah Inland Port is 16,000 acres in what's called the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake City. That is a property that was designated for industrial development between I-80 moving north to the Great Salt Lake, and there was already industrial development going on there. The fact that you have I-80, I-15, like we've mentioned, the railroad and those things happening. There's a Union Pacific intermodal operation there where containers are coming in from the seaport. And the whole idea behind starting this was, let's get a statewide effort to focus on that northwest quadrant, to get ahead of it and plan it so it wasn't going to be just a hodgepodge patchwork development, but actually, planned, thoughtful development that takes into consideration best way to be effective with business, with logistics, to be very mindful of the Great Salt Lake and environmental concerns that are there. Lots of different things that could happen there. And as we continued looking at a statewide approach, this idea of project areas meant that other places throughout the state could use the same tools that were granted by the legislature to plan and guide development in the northwest quadrant of Salt Lake, to have that sort of development happen elsewhere throughout the state of Utah. So that's what these project areas are.
Right. Well, and what I love about that is, so when the inland port was starting out, first, the real focus was all about kind of the Salt Lake area. And one thing that I would say, I was at that time, I was economic development director in Saratoga Springs. And our neighbor, Eagle Mountain, just has this big designated areas for manufacturing, distribution, and that type of industry. And one thing that I would always say is, we have what's the very western kind of freeway corridor right there from Salt Lake down to Utah County. It's slipping my mind.
Sure, the Bangerter. highway or
more west of Bangor.
Yeah, I'm going to have to defer to you. You guys are going to have your Wasatch Front
those
knowledge,
who are listening to the podcast, you'll know exactly. And I can't believe it's slipping my mind. Anyways, it comes down from Salt Lake and then it ties back into Redwood Road. And one of the things that I would always say is a good port has to have subports. There has to be spokes to the wheel to support what it's doing, especially if we're going to make this a statewide effort and make Utah a hub for imports and exports. And what's cool to me is in your efforts, as you were describing just a minute ago, and I'd love for you to go more into, is seeing the resources that you had here in Iron County and Cedar City with rail, Union Pacific Rail. Cedar City was dubbed 100 years ago Gateway to the Parks because this rail used to be the way people would get to the national parks. Seeing the opportunity for rail here helped you go, hey, we've got a lot of greenfield. We've got rail. How can we leverage the inland port down here? And you were able to help create the very first rural inland port in the state. So tell me about tell me the story of how you actually got the first rural inland port here in Iron County. I'd love to hear more about that story.
Sure. And this goes back before myself as economic development director for Cedar City, Iron County. There were several predecessors before me that realized the value of the rail spur coming here and the ability to bring materials in on train very efficiently, and then to build something and then ship it out to market on trucks. Mm-hmm. And we could go all the way back to when the Office of Economic Development was created in the 1980s. And this was kind of the plan to help Cedar City and Iron County recover from the closure of the iron mines at that time. Mm-hmm. Is let's look at the resources that we have, and transportation assets, the rail, the highway, were key in the very beginnings of Cedar City, Iron County economic development, and looking at ways to diversify our economy, to create higher paying jobs here in the area, primary employment to be able to keep families here. That's been the philosophy with economic development in Cedar City, Iron County. Mm. And so I was doing what you're doing in trying to follow that strategy. And how do we do that? So this wasn't an idea that just happened. Oh, the state's going to start optimizing logistics and transportation. Mm-hmm. It just fit into what we've already been doing for decades here. Right. And so that was the discussion that we had. Is we have this area west of Cedar City in Iron County. Before I came on board as economic development director, we had the creation of Port 15 Utah with that same idea. Right. Let's utilize the rail to bring stuff in and get stuff out if needed. And also let's use our proximity to the freeway and a great regional airport to do economic development and help build a diverse economy here. And so it was kind of a natural. And the discussions that I was having with the Port Authority is the tools that you have, like you said, similar to redevelopment tools, an RDA or a CDA or a CRA or whatever alphabet soup is thrown in currently. There's
opportunity zones and just all these different project areas.
Right. All of these different tools. So knowing that the state could help create a project area, and within that area be able to capture new property tax increment to reinvest back into that area over time. That's the sort of thing. That's how Port 15 was created. You have a current redevelopment project area here in the downtown, and it's a tool that's used very well throughout Utah and all over the U.S. Really, it's a great tool for economic development. It's post-performance. Something has to happen to bring up the values of property to be able to generate the type of revenue that you can reinvest back into infrastructure. Yeah. And we had a lot of that going on. My hat's off to those who thought about Port 15 Utah. Right. And linking that rail and bringing in infrastructure. and being so close to the interstate and to the airport, I mean, a lot of this legwork had already been done before I got here. So it was natural to create our project area here.
Right. One of our former economic development directors for Cedar City, Iron County, Brent Drew, played a big role in that and continues to play a big role in Port 15. A couple things that you were describing, just to put it in layman's terms, when Danny's talking about reinvesting back in and post-performance, basically what you're describing is saying, hey, if you come here, then you will receive from the revenues generated from your new project, not existing revenues in the county or the city or the state, but new revenues generated, you will receive back some of those new revenues for a certain duration of time. And a portion of those new revenues is going to be set aside in a little, we'll call it a pot for layman's terms, that will help continue to support the infrastructure and bringing in new business and new jobs, right? Is there anything you would add to that?
No, that's exactly right. And it's a little hard to grasp if this isn't a concept that you've worked with before, but I think a good illustration of this is very easy to see as you drive west of Cedar City on Highway 56 and then go out on Iron Springs Road. Mm-hmm. You hit Port 15 right there at the corner of the Y. You look to the north and you see these great buildings with Charlotte Pipe and with American Packaging and mm-hmm. GoEx. And these things are here because the creators of Port 15, Cedar City, Iron County, Port 15 LLC, and, mm-hmm. and those involved, they said they set up this redevelopment area where a portion of new property tax could go back in to pay the cost for the infrastructure that was put there. Mm-hmm. So
it's not money out of our taxpayers' or dollars out of our taxpayers' pockets, right?
Exactly. So if someone were to drive that same route in 2006 and hit the Y and look to the north, they saw some very appealing sagebrush, and that's all they saw. And that property was mostly privately owned, some of it owned by school trust lands, but the value of that property was set, and property taxes that were being paid was that base level that was set at 2006, 2007. Mm-hmm. Any investment that's happened since then, all of these new buildings, the roads that are out there, the fiber that is out there, the water, the sewer, the natural gas, everything that's in place so that business can easily come to town now. Mm-hmm. All of that, all of those improvements raises the value of that property. Those companies pay that, and that revenue that comes in goes back to pay for that infrastructure that's been put in place. The inland port is doing the same thing farther west on Iron Springs Road, where you see the BZI Innovation Park. Right. Again, you drive out there, and a couple of years ago, it was some beautiful sagebrush. But now you're seeing some major roads. You're seeing a really cool 67,000 square foot warehouse building. You're seeing a rail transload facility. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk more about that. And then even farther out, the Savage transload facility. So just in a couple of years, a lot of things have happened, and it's now starting to be able to generate some revenue that can be reinvested back as directed by the county and the Port Authority, working together to come up with the best possible scenario to attract the right kinds of things here to our community.
Right. So sticking along the lines of telling the story of how the Utah Inland Port came to Cedar City, which is called our subport's called the Iron Springs Inland Port. And you've mentioned the BZI Innovation Park. So talk about the partnerships that you helped create with the Inland Port and with BZI to get started that first project area.
Yeah, happy to tell that story. It's just so cool. And you had the folks from BZI in here, and I've listened to their podcast, and it's such an amazing story because as Economic Development Director, BZI came to me and said, we are really getting hammered by having to truck all of our steel in here for our steel fabrication operation. Mm-hmm. They took me a tour of of their facility, showed me what they were doing and how fast they were growing. They explained to me how much they were doing coast to coast in our country and how much of that depended on them being able to get steel in here to fabricate, to be able to put into these projects throughout the country. And it was all being trucked in from Phoenix, from Salt Lake City, and other places. We had all these trucks bringing all this steel in, and they said, we just need rail.
Right.
I said, well, let's see what we can do. The first thing is we looked at, we know that you've got a dozen other companies. Can they allow us to use the rail that comes to their facility? And that's not a great solution because Charlotte Pipe, they set up theirs to receive plastic resin and their raw materials to make pipe, and Genpack, the same thing. So these other companies weren't set up to unload steel. So the first thought was, well, let's find some suitable property in Port 15 or somewhere in the county along that rail where you can get access to the rail and the infrastructure that you need with power or whatever it is to be able to get your steel off rail cars and to your facility and then out to your customers. And we knew we would probably need somewhere between 20 to 30 acres of property. And in there looking at this, and this was all going on during COVID, which was really interesting. But I got a call back and they surprised me and said, well, we've purchased 820 acres. And
yeah, he talked about that in the podcast. Yeah.
Said, well, that's a little bit more than you needed, but I think that's great. And they laid out their plan. We would like to do an industrial park. We would like to be able to transload our own steel, but we'd like to open that up to other companies to be able to receive and ship materials via train through our process. And then we'd like to be able to work with Cedar City, Iron County to market and develop this innovation park,
right?
This industrial park. So that became the foundation of the creation of the inland port here in Iron County. The other thing that's interesting is in those early discussions about what's the best way to transload steel, I reached out to a company that does transloading in the state and all over the U.S. and all over North America, and that's Savage. So
that's who I was going to ask about next.
Yeah, Savage and BZI collaborated and talked and worked together, and between the two of them, they decided, well, BZI, you can create your rail transload, and there's enough demand here regionally that it makes sense for us to do the same thing as well. So trying to get two companies together for one solution, we ended up with two transload facilities now that can help dozens, if not hundreds of companies from throughout southwestern Utah and the greater region here.
Yeah. And to me, that's what's really awesome is the rail that we have here and the inland port, the designated inland port area, isn't just supporting Cedar City, Iron County. It's supporting the whole southern Utah region. So if there's a company that's a manufacturer or a distributor in Washington County in St. George that needs to ship stuff in, they can do it at a significantly less cost by rail and then truck that last mile. And I believe it's every rail car is equal to 4 truckloads, right?
Right. Somewhere 3 to 4, depending on what it is that's being hauled. But yeah, it's about 4 truckloads per one rail car.
Right. So our friends down in Washington County, I tell them all the time, I say, if you're trying to recruit a business to your area or manufacture or whatever, just tell them we've got rail, because 40 minutes away in any other major market is just your local commute to get to work, right?
Exactly.
And so to have rail, it's about this regional effort. And side note on that, because of that, we've been working with our friends down in Washington County and some of the other surrounding counties to form Southern Utah Economic Alliance to better position ourselves as another major Western market. We may not be as large as some of the, ones that have been out there for a long time, but to position and see Southern Utah as a place for resource of import, export, manufacturing, etc. And I think the Utah Inland Port, or the subport known as Iron Springs Inland Port, plays a huge factor in that progression that we've been making toward creating a regional market, another major Western market. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that as well.
I do. I think about it a lot. And, I think back, BZI was one of multiple companies who had reached out to me with that same question. How do we access the rail? How do we get something on or off the rail? Many folks here may be familiar with Lighthouse Foods in Washington County. They've been calling me for years just saying, what is a good solution for us to be able to get our food grade vegetable oils here by rail instead of, because they were trucking it from long, long distances.
Right.
And so that's one example. There's another company in Washington County called RS Poles. Same thing. They're a manufacturer of composite power poles. And like our plastics manufacturers here, they bring in an awful lot of plastic resins. They're set up in St. George. There is not rail there, and there won't be rail there, but there's the ability now to transload that material here through Rail Sync or through Savage, and to, like you say, go that last 40 miles and help that company be more successful. And that duplicates itself over and over. We have multiple companies now that are utilizing our transload facilities. It's not just BZI steel that's coming in, but we've got lumber, we've got fuel oils, we've got all kinds of things that are coming into our transload facilities now that most people have no idea about that's happening here. I should have brought the exact number, but this changes every day. But you mentioned 4 trucks coming off the road by coming to rail. Those long haul trucks, we know we've taken somewhere between 1,400 and 1,500 long haul trucks off the freeway that were coming to this area.
Right.
And now we've got some short haul runs instead that are going, just local here in the community or out, most of them less than an hour away.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned the short haul side, because what I always worry about when we talk about we're taking trucks off the road, which is beneficial to our freeway infrastructure, right? But I always worry people might think, oh, well, you're taking, long haul trucking jobs. Well, the truth is, at least most of and there's some who just absolutely love the long haul trucking, but most people that I know that drive a truck, they're looking for the short haul jobs so that they don't have to be gone from their families so long. And so actually what we're doing is helping create more demand for short haul and more opportunity for short haul by bringing stuff in by rail. We're taking that short haul, which is an awesome opportunity for people locally.
Right. It really is. And it was a pleasure years ago to be able to sit down with some of these big trucking companies that heard that we were looking at this inland port project, and they wanted to visit and say, how can we do this? We have a lot of demand for drivers who would like to eat breakfast at home and eat dinner at home and do those shorter runs. And that's something that this allows.
Yeah. So to start off, the inland port here started with BZI and Savage, and that was around 900-ish acres, right?
Right.
But just recently in this last year, we amended the inland or the project area boundary. And I like describing it as a project area so people understand that it's not, I mean, part of the Iron Springs Inland Port could be in the county and in the city or in, depending on where it wants the designation. It's not, like you said, it's not necessarily a physical structure. It's a project area. But we expanded that amended the project area to from 900 acres to 2,300 acres. Do you want to talk about the new areas that were recently expanded?
Sure. Yeah. These are areas that were growing already with light industrial mainly.
With things happening.
Right. Yeah. And areas that I had shown properties to companies who had interest years ago. And some of them came and most of them didn't, but that's economic development.
Yeah,
right?
It's true. Yeah.
Anyway, we added a property that is immediately south of the BZI Innovation Park. It goes all the way, including that Utah Steel area. So there's acreage there. And then right across Iron Springs Road from that, people who have driven that road recently have seen the sign for Silver Hills Business Park. And you see roads and infrastructure going in there. And now you see buildings going up, a company that you and I have worked with to help a company come to town. They haven't officially announced, I don't believe, to the community.
Don't think so either,
But their building's going up.
Yeah.
So we'll have some festivities and ribbon cutting in the future.
I'm excited for that.
But then just south of that one, we have one called Lakeside Industrial Park as well. So this is all new acreage. It's more focused on light industrial, smaller type warehouse, smaller type properties that can coexist and really work well with the Innovation Park, which is more targeting some larger projects.
Right. So we have these different, we have the larger project area, and then within the larger project area, we have these littler project areas that kind of serve different needs within manufacturing or distribution or whatever the case might be.
Right.
I'm really excited, although, we can't say who it is yet publicly, and we will. So be excited and for people to better understand, I'm going to digress here. A lot of times people have a hard time with economic development, and they always ask, well, why can't you say anything? And the reason why is it's not ours to say. It's the company's to say. It's their announcement to be made. Of course, they have to go through processes for permitting and doing some of that, but those announcements, it's theirs. And projects have been lost. I saw in one area that I was at before where Walmart was going to build a distribution center, and the week before the official announcement by Walmart, the mayor of that community had said something to someone, because it was like it was that week. It was going to happen. No biggie. Everybody was going to know. And Walmart pulled out entirely. Maybe that's urban legend. No, I'm just teasing. But I've seen examples of that. And so we have to be conscientious of the company. And part of the reason why is companies are, a lot of times, they're looking at different areas all at the same time. And if one community starts letting the cat out of the bag, and then they decide to go actually to this other community because it met their needs, like that public backlash is hard to deal with. So trying to temper expectations is really part of what it is, right?
Right. That's a big part of it. Then also just protecting that company that's looking at our area and looking at other areas, not just for the sake of the site that they're going to select, but they're coming from a business environment that's highly competitive, and they have competitors that they're watching each other's actions and trying to figure out the best way to be successful at business. And we don't want to spoil anybody's business strategies or anything by letting the cat out of the bag, like you said.
Exactly. So if a business is smart and ahead of the curve and looking at an area like Cedar City, Iron County, and they decide to go in, there's benefits to coming in, to being the first in a market. And so, yeah, that's exactly right. We're trying to protect those interests. Sorry for that little digression, but
it's good. And it makes me think about this company that is building right now in the Silver Hills Business Park. That would have been a tricky business to get without the transloading that's in place now, because that's a company that it would have been very difficult for them to be able to afford their own direct rail spur to their facility.
Right.
But now they're able to receive the materials that they need through a transload facility and build near that and be able to be profitable and successful here.
Well, I use the term truck the last mile, which can mean truck the last, part of getting to your destination. And they're literally trucking the last mile.
Exactly.
It's literally just like a mile away from the transload facilities. It's so accessible, and just a few miles from the freeway too,
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point. One more thing on kind of the expansion is the Iron Springs Inland Port was the first rural inland port in the state. And by the time I got here, a little over a year ago, I think there were, it had grown into 9 different project areas across the state. And now it's at 12, or is there more now?
It's at 12.
Yeah.
And I mean, for the year 2024, it looked like, the Utah port's just going and gobbling up land all over the state. And actually what's happening is 24 different communities are saying, we want to be able to utilize the Inland Port Authority's tools to create a project area here, because it's going to help us with our economic development strategy. So we don't just say, we want to do this here and we want to build that there. Mm-hmm. We wait for a community to say, we have the following opportunities. We would like to use these tools. So we work with that community and we put together a project area plan. Mm-hmm. We put together a budget. We put together a whole package of materials to present to our board of directors that says we want to work with Beaver County, or we want to work with Juab County. And this is what this community is trying to accomplish. And we think our tools can help them. So that's how we're going to work.
Absolutely.
So my supervisor, Scott Wolford, he says, you see one Utah Inland Port project area, you've seen one project area.
Right.
Because we have 12 project areas and they're all very distinctly different in the things that they offer.
The industries that they're trying to attract.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, some of us have had discussions with our team weekly saying, okay, we're working with EDC Utah. They've sent out a request for information for a client that they have. This client is looking for the following requirements to be in a community somewhere in the Western U.S. And multiples of our project areas will reply. And I try to work with the communities to put forth the best information to help a company succeed here locally.
Right.
And if it doesn't, then we've got other places in the state where it might succeed.
Yeah.
So we'd like to keep those wins here in our state.
Right. Well, and one thing you said that is a great way also for another way for people to better understand inland port is the inland port isn't gobbling up property because the inland port doesn't own the property.
Correct.
These are all privately owned BZI Innovation Park, Silver Hills, Savage. All of these are privately owned areas. And so if Port 15, for example, said, you know what, we want to be part of the inland port, they could approach and do that. But other communities might say, you know, we feel like a redevelopment area would function better for us and structure it the way we want to structure it. We don't want to be part of the inland port. It's totally the community approaching Utah Inland Port Authority to create a project area because, like we've described, the Inland Port Authority is simply a tool, a mechanism to help recruit business for these different communities.
Right. To help recruit new business and to help business that's existing to be able to grow and expand. And that's been the case here with BZI.
Yeah.
And their innovation park. A big chunk of what's happened here is that company's been able to expand exponentially. And that's so thrilling for our community. I mentioned that I work with project areas in Beaver County and Juab County. That Juab County is a really interesting one because that's 6 different counties where a lot of agriculture production happens, whether it's poultry or beef or grains or alfalfa or whatever that might be. But that's the main part of the economy for these centrally located counties. They came together and said, we want to work with the Utah Inland Port Authority to attract production, or not production, but the processing of these things. So maybe that's meat or poultry processing. Maybe that's grain processing, but we're working with those communities with their strategy now on the best way to do that. In Beaver County, they have so many amazing resources with energy, renewable energies, with geothermal production. They have amazing access to rail like we do, but they don't have the workforce that we do. But there are things that fit that community better than they fit here and vice versa. So that's what we're working to do is how do we as the Port Authority work with communities to optimize what they have and bring tools that will help all of these communities be successful.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually glad. The next place I wanted to go was just to have you give a brief highlight of some of the other inland port project areas that you oversee. Do you want to at least name drop each of the areas?
Sure.
You've kind of done it a little bit, but what their specific project areas are called. Let's give a little buoy up to our friends and neighbors.
Sure. So we are the Iron Springs Inland Port, named for the location where it's at. Juab County is the Central Utah Agri-Park Inland Port because that's the main focus. The Agri-Park, working with those 6 counties, is still the main focus. And those 6 counties, they're taking a different approach where they're working with their regional association of governments as a group to actually purchase property and build out an industrial park that's publicly owned. So we're not doing that here, but they're doing that there. They also have areas of opportunity where they can do some transloading, some small industrial and those sorts of things. Beaver County, I mentioned the geothermal. I don't know if everyone understands the size and the scope of this Fervo project that they may or may not have heard about, but Fervo is a geothermal company that's been working on and developing the next generation geothermal power generation. And what they're building in Beaver County, north of Milford, it will be the world's largest new renewable energy project. And that affects that county immensely, but it affects the entire state and the region with the ability to produce that type of renewable energy. So working on those projects. But the other thing that's interesting in the Mineral Mountains Inland Port in Beaver County, they have the zone north of Milford where all of those energy resources and mining and rail is located. But they have a small agriculture industrial park in Minersville, of all places, and they've got company there and other things potentially happening in Minersville. And Beaver Industrial Park, if anyone's driven north of Cedar City on I-15, you've seen a new building come up there. And the timing was great. Just a little over a year ago, as Smithfield Farms was pulling out and closing down a lot of operations, Beaver City was able to work with Beaver County and with the Inland Port to attract Unitech, which is an HVAC manufacturing company. So that's going up. And
great win for them.
Yeah, huge, and able to reemploy some of those folks that lost their employment and to employ above and beyond some of that. So
awesome. And so those are the three main project areas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's great. Well, okay, now I'm going to go into a digression more about Danny Stewart. So it makes perfect sense on why you looked at going to work for the Inland Port. It makes perfect sense why they completely stole you away from Iron County and Cedar City, which really gave Iron County and Cedar City and southern Utah more regionally an advantage of having Danny Stewart, who knows this area, being able to tag team with myself and our other peers in economic development. And so it's really cool to listen to this story of this progress and then to see you here, as the associate vice president for our area, for the Utah Inland Port. It's something that makes me, it just puts a grin on my face, and it makes me happy because every day that now I'm doing this job, I get to work with you on a lot of these fun projects. But I would love to hear more about some of when you were in my spot as the economic development director for Cedar City and Iron County. And maybe it's like choosing your favorite child or your least favorite child. I don't know. But what were some of your favorite projects that you got to work on? Because you were in this position for 12 years, right?
Right.
And what were some of your favorite projects that you got to work on?
The projects all kind of blend together, but some really stand out. I would go back to the Rainbow Sign Decor Works project
on Main Street.
On Main Street. This is a company with such an amazing story. This was a company that started a small business as a sign and banner company, operating out of a very small place. And they went to the Business Resource Center back in the day and got some amazing counseling about how to plan for and grow their business. And I mean, what I'm talking about, this story is an amazing story of a company that started here from scratch, doing signs and banners. They found a really cool industrial niche for them, doing interior design for supermarkets.
Yeah. Harmon's is one of their clients, right?
Exactly. And before that, it was Smith's. And these guys are phenomenal. And the things they do, we can say Smith's and Harmon's, and we see what happens here regionally and locally. But Smith's or Harmon's and Lynn's, our Lynn's store was also designed, and the interior was when they expanded by Rainbow Sign Decor Works. But Jeff Dancy and his family and his team, they're just so innovative and so amazing. And it was such a pleasure to work with them because they work with Associated Foods, and that's the warehouse group that both Lynn's and Harmon's belong to.
Right.
They have the Western family and those types of products. Yeah. But anyway, that's a warehouse with a whole bunch of stores in the Intermountain West that they got involved with. Well, they've become the preferred interior design company for those counterparts of Associated Foods all over the U.S.
Right.
So when I started working with the Dancys, they were honestly looking at a more Midwestern site for their business so that they could be better positioned to reach coast to coast with what they're doing. And just had great discussions with them. And Jeff Dancy said, we love the community. We love what we're doing here. We're just trying to figure out the best strategy for our company. And anyway, it worked out that we were able to put some things together that, I think that the best thing that we have going for us economic development wise, our best incentive is a business gets to do business in Cedar City and Iron County.
Right. Yep.
And that really is an incentive. We have a great community, a great culture.
Great quality of life here.
So many things, great quality of workforce and so many good things. And they recognized that, and they were worried about taking that step into another part of the country. And how do we duplicate the success here? Anyway, they went from some warehouse space out on Westview Drive, which they had kind of cobbled together over the years, into the most amazing place on Main Street, which accomplished two things. It gave them this great workspace for their company and their culture, but it also renovated a historic building in Cedar City's downtown. That was the Utah Parks bus depot. So that's one of my favorite projects because it helped this fantastic company grow, and it helped Cedar City keep a really important historic asset on our Main Street and help expand our historic Main Street farther to the north there. Yeah. So that's one of my all-time favorite projects. But there are so many. The working with GoEx was great. Working with American Packaging, I hate to leave anybody out, but I was assistant in economic development when Brennan Wood, who probably should be on this show as well. He was economic development director.
Yeah, who's now president of Southwest Tech.
Of Southwest Tech, right. Yeah. Anyway, he worked to bring GAF to a large building which had been vacated, and to watch him work with that company and to learn from him was also really important and really special to me as well. So I'm leaving out dozens of other projects, but those are the ones that just come to top of mind today.
Yeah, and those are great wins. Another area actually that I think, and maybe we don't think in terms of economic development, it's not job creation. And actually, before I even get into this, one of the digressive things I want to say is I always tell people that my job is to create jobs. And, people often get worried about, well, you're bringing in all these outsiders. What I say is my job is to create jobs so that your kids can stay here. The outsiders are going to come regardless. And that has a lot to do with doing smart planning and making sure the planning is done in a way that keeps the integrity of what we love about our community here as it grows, right? But there's certain quality of life things that you can never take away from us, like the beautiful outdoors and some of those things that are out there. But with that digression, the area that I was going to get into that doesn't necessarily create jobs, but you've played a big role in, is the amount of solar projects that we have here. Here in Iron County, our county engineer did the math, and he said with all of our operational projects and our current projects in the queue to be built, produces enough solar power to power half of the homes in the state of Utah, which that's tremendous when you think about it. If you drive down Main Street, you know why? Because the south side of every business sign is sun bleached. And then on the north side, all the signs look pristine and perfect. So it's no wonder there's so much solar power here. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the solar projects that you worked on and what the benefit is to our area?
Right. Coming into the position of economic development director, one of the first things I came across, you know, when you get the job and you're sorting through the files and trying to set up shop for yourself. And,
right.
I found this map, and it was renewable resources in the state of Utah. And it was one of these color-coded maps that showed, you know, from blue to yellow to green to whatever, to red. And all of Iron County, or for the most part of it, most of western Iron County and some of it close to the mountains, was just the reddest red on this map. And I said, what in the world is this? And just looking through the map and the information that came with it, it said this is one of the top potential locations for solar energy development in the U.S. It's high altitude, it's cooler temperatures, it has a lot of sunshine. And going back to Brennan again before me, he started working with a company that was headquartered in Norway, actually, and had a U.S. operation out of San Francisco. And they built Utah's first utility scale solar project west of Parowan, the Utah Red Hills project.
Yeah.
And at that time, solar development was really
new,
coming online. There were a lot of technology improvements to make it happen. There were some federal incentives to spur that along. But really our best incentive, again, was we had these natural resources. This is a great place for it. It doesn't create a ton of jobs for us.
Sure.
Creates a bunch of jobs temporarily while they build a solar plant. But then it generates a lot of revenue that comes back to our taxing entities
through property,
through property tax, especially the personal property on all of that equipment. Reed Erickson, our county planner, he really paved the way for solar development and doing it the way that works best for a community and making sure that we protect our community, we protect our resources, and once those solar panels are done, that the reclamation and everything is done properly. You were taught, you always taught collaboration in this, and I think the collaboration between the companies that were interested in this area, Office of Economic Development, the elected officials, and Reed Erickson specifically, who wrote the county statute on how these things should happen. A lot of other places throughout the state and throughout the country have mimicked that. Yeah.
Well, and I said our county engineer earlier, but it was actually Reed that put together those numbers, if I'm not mistaken, about how much solar power there is. I'm trying to remember. It was at the Appaloosa Solar One project where that comment was made, and I've loved that comment because kind of like your experience of finding that map, I don't think people realize how much potential there is for renewable energy here. And some of those incentives to get those renewable energy projects functions the same way we described earlier, post-performance, based on, new revenues generated from the taxes. And then when those incentives come offline, that we're not, rebate, as I guess a easy way to describe it to these companies. When those rebates are done, that property tax and the money that's going to flow in to the county is significant to go toward the general fund for the county and infrastructure projects and all of these different things. That's just going to help better the quality of life that we have in our communities here.
Sure. And to be honest, there is some valuation depreciation that happens with that equipment that goes down. But I think our county commissioners, hats off to them, because they looked at this as a good thing for the community at the time. they didn't give all of the property tax rebated back to these companies, just a percentage based on what their capital investment was over a certain number of years, and then it ends, like you say. Mm-hmm. But they made sure that our taxing entities are also benefiting from that. And the county, the city, the school district in particular have been receiving revenue that they wouldn't have without the creation of these projects. And that will be ongoing as long as these projects are operating, and we'll hit the point where that equipment's going to need to be replaced, and it's going to bring new valuation up. And so we'll see that as a perpetual stream of income for our taxing entities.
Yeah. Well, Danny, there's so much we can talk about. As we kind of wrap up here, where I wanted to go was my first interaction with you was when I was the economic development director in Cedar City. I think we're at a Utah Alliance or some sort of conference where all of our peers were together. And at that time, I was trying hard to recruit Costco. And I know you've heard me repeat this because I love it and it's hilarious. And you said to me, well, whenever people are asking about Costco in Cedar City, I tell them, well, we're getting the Costco food court, right? And you had a couple little cohorts or counterparts help you spread that rumor just as a joke. And that cracks me up so much. Is we're not getting Costco, we're getting a Costco food court, and tell everyone that.
I honestly need to give credit to Neil Smith, who many of your listeners probably know. Neil's a pillar in the community, but he, I explained to him at the time that I was in the position of economic development director, I talked to Costco hundreds of times, and they just said, you're not our market. We need a lot more people within 15 minutes of where we are.
Right.
And I had that discussion with Neil one day, and he says, well, it was probably April 1st. And he says, I'm going to start a rumor. And so credit to him that he says, we're not big enough for the full Costco, but we're big enough for the food court. You just get your membership and you can get the food court, your hot dogs, your pizza. And that followed me forever. That have you heard we're getting a Costco food court? So thanks, Neil.
We're spreading the good rumors. Well, and to be loving to our community, it's people are excited. They want to see these cool things come like a Costco. You talked about the 15-minute radius. When I was working with Costco to get them in Saratoga, they wanted a 110,000 population in a 5-mile radius. And at Saratoga Springs at that time was only 28,000 people. But I was able to demonstrate to them how all of Eagle Mountain drove through this one intersection, and how all of the south end of Saratoga Springs had to drive through that intersection. And a large chunk of Lehigh right next to us shopped in Saratoga Springs. And by the time, and that was about 90,000 when I was talking to them. And by the time they would be built, they would be exactly at their mark. And helping tell that story made all the difference. Will it make the difference here? I know everybody wants a Costco, wants a Sam's Club. Most people prefer, at least I hear people say they prefer a Costco, but Sam's Club would be great too. I mean, our Walmart is one of the top grossing. It was the number one grossing Walmart in the state. I just looked at some numbers yesterday, and I think, or the last week, and I think it was, now we're number 2, but we're still in the running for the number 1 grossing. And that's because, kind of like Saratoga Springs, the dynamic of a 5-mile radius didn't fit. Like, our market's just different. And they're used to looking at these other markets that meet that, but our market is different in the sense that we have a 90-minute radius of people driving in here to shop and meet their needs, right?
Right. It's a tough story to tell to site selectors who have a formula that they go by, but it's worth telling. And I've been telling it forever, and my predecessors all told it since the 1980s. So we're going to let you run with that.
I know.
And I enjoy watching it from the industrial side of things.
From the sidelines, yeah. Well, but that's how we got Home Depot, right? Sure. Was just some persistence of developers, economic development directors trying to say, come hear our story. Come see that you're going to hit the numbers that you're looking for, right? With that, let's kind of conclude. And is there anything else about, like, Utah Inland Port or just about Cedar City, Iron County, anything else you want to kind of throw in there and share with those listening?
I'll go back to a comment you made a little bit ago, because it's been with me since I first heard the term economic development. And that was when I was a student working for a student newspaper, and Cedar City, Iron County hired their first economic development director, who was Terrence Bride. And I interviewed him as a student, said, "Tell me about your job. Tell me about what you do." And he said, a lot of economic development directors get blamed for bringing growth. And he said, growth happens for numerous reasons. In economic development, we want to get ahead of that, and we want to plan that so that we can do a couple of things. We want to preserve the community that people love and enjoy, and we want to offer the opportunities for these people's children. And he said something at the time that I think about almost daily. He said, our number one export in Cedar City is educated young people. We graduate a lot of kids and send them away. And it was a lot more back then than it is now, but we still do the same thing. And that's at the heart of what I do with the Utah Inland Port Authority. And I know that you do with your job as well, is how do we help market this place and take down barriers that will encourage the right types of business to come here, that will provide opportunities for us to grow in a way that allows families to thrive here and to stay here if they desire, and communities to grow in a healthy, natural way. You're going to get blamed for growth and for people having to sit through too many red lights in their commute home. And that's fine. But like I say, that growth's coming. So I'm just excited to be working with you to hopefully create some of those kinds of opportunities.
Yeah. Well, and I tell people we're focused more on creating jobs for our own kids, right? Sure. Creating the opportunity for our own kids. That is such a cool story. So full circle, listening to your story of interviewing the first economic development director for the area, and then not ever thinking that you might one day be sitting in that position as well. That's such a cool story. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, happy to do that. And, from that time on, I just kind of became this geeky fan of the Economic Development Office, and talked to everyone who sat in that seat after that until I got to do it. And it was, it's an interesting way that we end up where we end up, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, well, to finally close out, tell people where they can go to learn more about the Utah Inland Port and what's going on here and throughout the state.
Sure. Well, first of all, people are welcome to reach out to me. My email address is very simple. It's just danielstewart@utah.gov. And you can find that, my contact info and much more information on our website, which is inlandportauthority.utah.gov.
Awesome. Well, Danny, thanks so much for coming on. We'll see you more later this week.
I'm sure we will. Thanks a lot, David.